Welcome to an unprecedented look at our legal system. What you are about to witness is completely unfiltered and unedited. Prepare yourself for raw, authentic footage captured directly from the front lines of justice, where truth is the only objective.
What's the reason for the stop? Suspicious activity. You don't match this floor. Show ID. Don't match is an illegal basis. Am I being detained? Step away from the elevator. Hands where I can see them.
The elevator doors were already halfway closed when the voice cut through the morning noise. "Sir, step out of the elevator right now." The man froze for half a second, then calmly extended his hand to press the open button. The doors slid back with a soft mechanical hum. Inside the elevator, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. Outside the lobby of the federal office building was alive with movement. Shoes clicking on marble floors. Coffee cups clinking. A low murmur of conversations layered over the steady beep of security turnstiles. The man was black, mid-40s, clean-cut, wearing a navy suit that showed signs of frequent use rather than fashion. A leather briefcase rested at his feet. His expression did not change. He looked directly at the two uniformed officers standing inches from the threshold. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice even controlled. "We received a report," one officer replied, hand hovering near his radio. "You need to step out so we can talk." "A report of what exactly?" The second officer glanced toward the security desk, then back at the man. "Suspicious activity. You don't match the usual profile for this floor." The words hung in the air. Suspicious. Profile. The elevator behind him filled with silence. A white woman clutching a folder avoided eye contact. A young intern stared at the floor numbers blinking above the door. No one spoke. The man stepped forward, stopping just short of the lobby tile. He adjusted his grip on the briefcase, deliberately slow. "I work here," he said. "I'm already late for a meeting." The officer shook his head. "Sir, we need you to cooperate. Please step aside." The smell of burnt coffee drifted from a nearby kiosk. Outside the glass doors, traffic horns echoed faintly. Everything about the morning felt normal except this moment. Except the way eyes were beginning to turn. Except the tension tightening in the officer's jaw. "I'm happy to cooperate," the man said, "but I need to know why I'm being stopped." The officer did not answer directly. He took a half step closer, lowering his voice. "This will go faster if you just do what we're asking." A phone lifted somewhere behind the security line. Someone had started recording. The red dot reflected faintly in the polished marble floor. The man exhaled slowly through his nose. His shoulders remained relaxed, but his eyes hardened, not with anger, but with recognition. He had seen this posture before, this hesitation, this quiet escalation that pretended to be procedure. "Officer," he said, each word measured, "am I being detained?" The question changed the air in the lobby. The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. The other officer shifted his stance, blocking the elevator door completely now. "Sir, step away from the elevator." A misunderstanding had already crossed into confrontation. What began as an unexplained stop was turning into something else, something heavier. And none of them, not the officers, not the onlookers, not the man with the briefcase, yet understood how irreversible the next few minutes would be. To understand why the moment in the lobby unfolded the way it did, you have to step away from the elevator and go back decades long before the marble floors and security badges, back to a small brick house on the south side of Cleveland. The man with the briefcase was born there 46 years earlier. His mother worked nights as a hospital clerk. His father drove a city bus and studied for civil service exams at the kitchen table after midnight. Money was always counted carefully. Silence was learned early. So was discipline. He learned to read by the light of a stove bulb while his parents slept. By 13, he already understood that being black meant being watched longer and forgiven less. He excelled anyway. Public schools, debate team, a partial scholarship to a state university. Then law school paid for with loans and a promise to himself that he would never waste the opportunity. Professors described him as precise. Classmates described him as relentless. He clerked during the day, studied at night, and memorized statutes the way others memorized lyrics. His career in the federal system began quietly. Entry-level assistant prosecutor. Long hours. Low visibility. He took cases others didn't want. Fraud. Public corruption. Civil rights violations that dragged on for years and ended careers. He built a reputation for patience and preparation. He did not grandstand. He won because he knew the law better than the room. There were cases that followed him home. a wrongful conviction overturned after 15 years. A police misconduct case where the defendant wore the same uniform as the officers now standing in that lobby. He had looked them in the eye then too and asked simple questions they could not answer. Promotion followed. Senior prosecutor, advisory committees, internal reviews. His name appeared on briefing memos read in Washington. He believed in institutions. He believed that systems, though flawed, could be corrected from within. That belief was hard-earned. On the other side of the lobby story were the officers. Both had joined security enforcement in the wake of heightened federal alert levels. Training focused on threats, patterns, profiles. They were taught to trust instincts shaped by statistics, not context. Neither considered themselves biased. Both believed they were cautious professionals. One officer had been flagged twice for unnecessary escalations. Nothing serious enough to discipline. Counseling. Reminders. The other had no formal complaints, only notes and evaluations about rigidity and difficulty de-escalating tense situations. They worked long shifts. They were praised for vigilance. In briefings, they were shown images of threats that did not look like office workers, but the language was vague, suspicious demeanor, out-of-place behavior, unusual access. The definitions blurred over time. The boundaries softened. The consequences were always theoretical, never personal. That morning, neither officer knew the man by name. They knew only what they thought they saw. A black man exiting an elevator on a restricted floor. A suit that didn't match their mental picture of authority. A briefcase that could be anything. Their decision to intervene felt justified to them. Routine. Preventive. To the man, it felt familiar. A replay of moments from childhood. From law school. From court hallways where he had been mistaken for a defendant instead of counsel. He had learned how to survive those moments. Speak calmly, ask precise questions, keep hands visible, document everything. He had taught younger attorneys the same skills, not as theory, but as survival. As the officers closed ranks in the lobby, both sides brought their histories with them. The officers brought years of reinforcement that hesitation was failure. The man brought decades of evidence that compliance without clarity often led nowhere good. Neither side believed they were the villain in this story. And that was the most dangerous part. The elevator had been the threshold, not just between floors, but between assumptions and reality. Between authority perceived and authority earned. And once crossed, there would be no simple way back. The lobby no longer moved the way it had a few minutes earlier. The rhythm was broken. People slowed their steps without realizing it. Conversations dropped to whispers. The security gates continued to beep as badges scanned through, but each sound now felt too loud, too sharp. The man stood a few feet from the elevator, positioned exactly where the officers had guided him. Not pushed, guided. That distinction mattered to them. To him it did not. He adjusted his jacket once more and reached into the inside pocket with deliberate care. "I have identification," he said. "Federal identification." The nearest officer raised his palm. "Leave your hands where I can see them." They were already visible. The man paused, then slowly withdrew the badge holder and held it up at chest level. The laminated card caught the overhead light. Seal? Photograph? Title. He did not thrust it forward. He did not wave it. He simply presented it. "I'm a senior federal prosecutor assigned to this building," he said. "You can verify that with one call." The officer barely glanced at the badge. He looked past it toward the man's face, as if searching for something that confirmed his earlier judgment. "We'll verify it," he said, "but you're not going anywhere until we do." "Am I being detained?" The question again, calm, precise, a lawyer's question. The officer hesitated just long enough for people to notice. A man near the security desk raised his phone higher. Another stepped closer, pretending to check messages while angling the camera toward the scene. "Sir, stop complicating this," the second officer said. "Just relax. Relax." The word landed wrong. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He had heard that word during traffic stops, during courthouse screenings, always right before things escalated. "I am relaxed," he said. "I'm asking for the legal basis for this stop." There was none that could be articulated cleanly. Suspicious behavior sounded thinner with each repetition. Out of place felt indefensible out loud. The officers defaulted to procedure language. Security protocol, verification process, temporary hold. The crowd sensed the imbalance. A woman in a gray blazer spoke up quietly. "He showed you his badge. What's the issue?" Please step back, ma'am, one officer replied without turning. Another voicemail uncertain. This doesn't look right. The officer's posture changed. Shoulders squared, feet spread. Not aggressive yet, but prepared. The kind of stance that said this interaction was no longer about clarification. It was about control. The man noticed it immediately. He took a slow breath. He knew this moment. The point where logic stopped mattering and optics took over. Where backing down was framed as weakness. Officer, he said, I have a meeting in 10 minutes with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Delaying me without cause is a problem. The second officer reached for his radio. Let's take him to the side room while we sort this out. Take him! The phrase rippled through the small crowd. The phone cameras did not lower. They rose. The man did not resist when the officers gestured toward the corridor. He walked on his own steps, steady head up. But the shift was unmistakable. He was no longer a professional inconvenienced by security. He was now a subject being moved out of sight. As they passed the security desk, he caught his reflection in the glass. A black man in a suit flanked by uniforms, surrounded by watching eyes. The image was painfully familiar. Behind them, someone whispered, "They're detaining him." Another voice replied, "For what?" No one answered. The escalation was complete. Not because anyone raised their voice. Not because force had been used, but because the balance of power had tipped quietly and decisively in full view of witnesses who would soon understand they had just watched something they couldn't unsee. The side room was smaller than the lobby, windowless, painted an institutional beige that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. A single table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs. A security camera mounted high in the corner, its red light steady and unblinking. The door closed with a dull thud that felt heavier than it should have. The officers positioned themselves between the man and the exit. Not touching him yet. Not formally arresting him. Holding him in that narrow space where rights became negotiable and time stretched without rules. "Place your briefcase on the table," one officer said. The man complied. He set it down slowly, aligning it with the edge of the table as if he were in his own office. The leather made a soft sound against the metal surface. He remained standing. "Have a seat." He sat, straight-backed, hands resting flat on his thighs. His breathing was steady, but inside the calculations had begun. Duration of detention, lack of probable cause, witnesses, video. He was already building the record in his head. The officer turned away, speaking quietly into his radio, requesting verification, running names. The other stood silent, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the man's face as if waiting for it to crack. Minutes passed, each one felt intentional. "Sir," one officer finally said, "we're going to need you to stand up." "For what reason?" "Standard procedure." The man rose slowly. As he did, the officer stepped closer than necessary. A hand brushed his elbow, guiding him toward the wall. Not forceful, just enough. Just turn around. This was the moment. The one that separated inconvenience from violation. The man hesitated just briefly, then turned. He placed his hands behind his back without being asked. He knew what resistance would look like on camera. He knew how quickly calm could be rebranded as non-compliance. The click of metal echoed in the small room. Handcuffs closed around his wrists. Cold. Tight. Final. For a split second, no one spoke. The sound lingered. The camera light blinked. "You're detaining me without cause," the man said quietly. "This is unlawful." The officer avoided his eyes. "You're being held pending verification." Held. Detained. Arrested. The words blurred when you were the one wearing the cuffs. They guided him back into the hallway. People were still there. More of them now. Phones openly raised. No pretense anymore. Someone gasped softly when they saw the cuffs. He walked between the officer's steps, measured shoulders square. His face showed nothing. No anger, no fear, only something heavier. Disbelief edged with a kind of tired clarity. As they moved, he caught fragments of sound. "This is wrong." He showed his badge. "Why are they cuffing him?" The officer said nothing. Silence was their shield now. They stopped near the security desk. The man felt the weight of eyes on his back. He felt the cuffs bite into his wrists as he shifted slightly. The metal reminded him with every movement that none of his titles mattered in this moment. Inside his mind, another voice spoke. The voice he had learned to trust. This will end. But not quietly. Somewhere behind him, a phone camera zoomed in. The image froze him in that position. A senior federal prosecutor. In handcuffs. In his own building. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was an injustice fully formed, documented, and already moving faster than anyone in the room could stop. The room they brought him into was larger, colder, designed for authority. Glass walls, a long table, a monitor mounted near the ceiling showing camera feeds from the lobby. His own image appeared on one of them, frozen a few minutes earlier, hands cuffed, flanked by uniforms. An older man in a suit entered, moving faster than his title usually required. Facilities Director. Federal Liaison. Someone who understood exactly how bad this already was. His eyes went first to the cuffs, then to the badge still clipped to the man's belt. "What is this?" he asked, not raising his voice. The officers began explaining at the same time. Suspicious activity, verification delay, security protocol. Their words overlapped, thin and defensive. The suited man held up his hand. "Stop." He turned to the man in cuffs. "Sir, can you state your name for the record?" The man did not hesitate. He gave his full name, title, office, years of service. His voice was calm, but something in the room shifted as the words landed. The suited man swallowed. He already knew. He had seen the name in emails, in memos, in briefings that crossed his desk regularly. "One moment," he said. He stepped out and made a call. The room was silent except for the low hum of the ventilation system. The officers avoided looking at the man. The man looked straight ahead. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. When the suited man returned, his face had changed. The color had drained slightly. His posture softened in a way that could not be trained. "This individual is a senior federal prosecutor assigned to this district," he said. "His credentials are valid. His access is authorized." The words hit the officers one by one. The first officer blinked rapidly. The second took a step back as if distance might undo the last 20 minutes. The suited man looked at the cuffs again. "Take those off. Now." Keys rattled. Metal opened. The pressure released from the man's wrists, leaving deep red marks that would take hours to fade. He flexed his hands once slowly. "I need a full incident report," the suited man said, voice tight. "Immediately." The man finally spoke again. "This interaction has been recorded by multiple witnesses. I will need copies of all security footage. Now." The suited man nodded. "Of course." One officer tried to speak. "Sir, we didn't know." The man met his eyes for the first time since the cuffs closed. Knowing was never the requirement, he said quietly. Verifying was. No one argued. Outside the room, phones were already lighting up. Messages. Clips. The image of a black man in handcuffs inside a federal building was spreading faster than explanations ever could. The revelation was complete. Not just of who he was, but of how easily the system had failed before asking the most basic question. The officers stood very still. They understood now. Not just that they were wrong, but that this moment would follow them long after the building emptied. And the man standing free again knew something else. This was no longer about him getting to his meeting. This was about what happened next. The story did not end when the cuffs came off. That was only the moment it became impossible to contain. By the time the man reached his office, his phone was vibrating non-stop. Missed calls, texts, a short video clip already circulating among staff shot from the lobby, grainy, but unmistakable. The angle caught his face clearly. Calm, restrained, in handcuffs. Within an hour, the clip left the building. It moved the way these stories always do. First internal group chats, then private social feeds, then public timelines. By lunchtime, it had crossed into national conversation. By evening, millions had seen it. Senior federal prosecutor detained in his own building. Handcuffed without cause. Verified after the fact. Comment sections filled with the same question over and over. If this can happen to him, what happens to everyone else? The legal response began quietly. No press conference. No statement. Just paperwork. A formal notice requesting preservation of evidence. All security footage. Radio logs. Badge access records. Incident reports. Names. Shift schedules. Training manuals. The internal investigation followed. What began as a single stop unraveled into patterns. Prior complaints resurfaced. Similar stops dismissed as misunderstandings. Language repeated across reports. Suspicious. Out of place. Failed to cooperate. Each phrase looked neutral on paper. Together they told a different story. The officers were placed on administrative leave, then reassigned. Then one resigned before the findings were finalized. The other fought it briefly until counsel advised otherwise. Careers ended not with handcuffs, but with silence. The lawsuit was filed weeks later. Carefully written, methodical, no theatrics. It cited constitutional violations, unlawful detention, and systemic failure. It attached timestamps, screenshots, witness affidavits. The settlement came faster than anyone expected. No admission of wrongdoing, a significant financial payout, mandatory policy changes, training requirements, oversight provisions that would last years. The man declined interviews. When pressed, he issued a single statement. This was never about me. It was about exposure. Behind closed doors, he pushed harder. Not for money, for data, for audits, for changes that would outlast the news cycle. Meetings followed. Committees. Revisions to protocol language that once allowed instinct to masquerade as procedure. The building changed. New signage, clearer access rules. Verification before detention. Cameras repositioned. Policies rewritten in plain language that left less room for interpretation. The crowd that had watched it happen returned to their routines. But they carried something new. The memory of seeing authority challenged by truth, of watching assumptions collapse under scrutiny. As for the man, he returned to work the next day, same suit, same briefcase, same elevator. But the system around him had shifted just slightly under the weight of accountability. Justice in this case did not arrive with applause. It arrived with consequences. Quiet, documented, permanent. What happened in that lobby was not complicated, it was unlawful. Under the Fourth Amendment, a detention requires reasonable, articulable suspicion tied to specific facts. Not instincts, not profiles, not a feeling that someone does not belong. The man was stopped, moved, and restrained without any crime being alleged. That alone was a constitutional violation. Security protocol does not override the Constitution. Verification is not detention. Authority does not excuse shortcuts. The moment handcuffs were applied without probable cause, the line was crossed. Everything after that only deepened the damage. But law is only part of the lesson. The deeper issue was bias operating quietly, efficiently, and with confidence. No slurs were spoken, no raised voices. Yet assumptions guided decisions at every step. Who looked like they belonged? Who needed extra scrutiny? Who had to prove legitimacy instead of being granted it? Bias often hides behind professionalism. It sounds like policy language. It wears neutral words. Suspicious. Out of place. Non-cooperative. When repeated often enough, those words become shields against accountability. For the public, there are practical lessons. Stay calm. Keep your hands visible. Ask clear questions. Am I being detained? On what grounds? Document everything if it is safe to do so. Video matters. Witnesses matter. Silence and compliance do not guarantee protection, but clarity creates a record. For institutions, the lesson is sharper. Training that ignores bias reinforces it. Protocols that allow discretion without oversight invite abuse. Verification must come before restraint every time. Authority must be questioned internally or it will be challenged publicly. And for anyone watching that video and thinking this was an exception, consider this. The outcome was justice because the man had knowledge, position, and visibility. Most people do not. Most incidents end quietly, undocumented, and unresolved. This story is not about a prosecutor who was briefly detained. It is about a system that revealed its reflexes when it thought no one important was watching. The real question is not whether this should have happened. It is how often it already has. You watched how quickly a routine morning turned into a constitutional violation. You saw how long it took for truth to matter. And you saw what accountability looks like when it finally arrives. What would have happened if he had not known the law? If no one had recorded? If the cuffs had come off quietly and the story had ended there? That question is the lesson.
Welcome back. We are here to relentlessly pursue the truth and hold those in power accountable. Because while words can be twisted, the records simply do not lie. Thank you for joining us today.